again. So at the very least, I don't have to subject you all to writing the tweet for the stream again. Now, obviously, I've been having some trouble getting started on time. Now, today it's a little bit different just because I haven't been feeling 100%. But there's also a little bit of good news on this style. So, or the style on this front. So I kind of hit a bunch of milestones at work. I'm gonna have a lot to do over the weekend, including the House of Light recording for YouTube. And there's always going to be more work, but I'm hoping that some of the late nights will be sort of going more into the background for the next little bit. And if that's the case, that means that, of course, I'll be able to be a little more consistent with the start. I realize that that's been a mixed, kind of a mixed bag so far. I seem to have lost GOG. Okay, there we go. But yeah, hope springs eternal. What else? Yeah, I mean, other than starts and all of that, I will do my best to do a full stream tonight, but because I'm not feeling 100%, I wanted to be sort of upfront about the possibility I may not be able to make it the whole way through. The truth is as well, there is a small benefit to me if I can get a little bit of the work that I do over the weekend done tonight, even though it is rather late, even in terms of starting a stream. That will definitely free me up more, but especially because I missed the Wednesday, the Friday, and then Monday between the local game dev meetup and Easter. I definitely want to try and keep on top of streaming. Another thing I've noticed is that I'm trying to figure out what's going on with my VPN and streaming, because it definitely feels like I've had to restart the stream a couple of times. It seems to be okay now, but that's another thing that's kind of been getting in the way of broadcasting, and in particular when I'm doing stuff like Cyberpunk. So if I'm doing a strategy game or something that's relatively more static, as long as the voice isn't interrupted, I should be okay. There's small visual imperfections, but I also kind of got my start on Twitch streaming at a very, very low bit rate, and that was before non-partners could have transcoding. So a weird thing was people who liked watching on mobile but didn't necessarily like large communities. They liked that individual attention of a broadcaster. It turns out that worked really well for them. So again, not something you could have predicted. But I guess the thing is that if I do wind up having bandwidth problems, and it's specifically about trying to keep a high bit rate for the frame rate and the resolution that I want to stream at, being able to go back to slightly more static games like strategy games, which work well with that format, that may be an option. But anyways, not something I'm going to have to deal with right now. For now, we're going to jump back into Cyberpunk. Excuse me.
Don't wait. Leave your earthly worries, ulcers, and tumors behind and take off for the stars.
Now this is interesting. Oh right, I think I needed to go. So I was partway through on this. Anyways, let's see what's going on here. Leah Gladden to Wakako Okada. Make sure you're holding on to something, because I've got something that'll make you fall out of your chair. I've got a pretty piece of tech for sale that jailbreaks corporate equipment. 100% effective on both implants and weapons. Works across the board except for Night Corp tech. Must use another encryption system. Interested? Don't think too long. I have other buyers. I'm buying. Send details and payment on payment and delivery.
Looks like Leia went to the Tiger Claws. Behind Waco's back.
Tisk, tisk, tisk. Claws aren't the deal-honoring type.
Let's see if she got lucky.
Kana, got something for you. A device for jailbreaking corporate equipment. 100% effective on both implants and weapons. Works across the board except for Night Corp tech. Must use another encryption system. Let me know if you're interested, but don't think long. I have other buyers. Holy shit, I'll give you 3 times more than the best offer. Drop by Wired Head and we'll hit the market. All right. So I did read all this stuff before the stream, but I want to mark it. So I have done this one before. I seem to remember getting into a big fight in the club, and I don't remember if that's because of my. That's actually not that far away. I don't remember if it's because of my inability to play stealthily or if you do actually need to fight your way through on this one, but we will find out in a little bit. I don't know how much interest there is for everyone. I mean, there's a side of me that says anybody who didn't like the kind of the red punk idea already unsubscribed, unfollowed. But one thing that was kind of funny was I mentioned the idea to a couple of people. One person actually gave me a really interesting book recommendation. So I ordered that at the local shop. So, of course, the drawback for that is that it'll take a couple of weeks to come in, but I've got no shortage of things to read, so I'm... So I'll see where that's coming in. But the other one was I was pleasantly surprised at how warmly people received the idea. Now, one drawback about that as a story, like really what I have as a setting right now, is the, a setting isn't a story. I don't have characters. I don't have things happening to characters. I kind of know what doesn't work. I know what doesn't interest me in terms of the plots that the AI came up with. But then, as kind of the purpose of that demonstration was, like what I'd meant to show with it was that really the hard work, that's still for you. That's kind of that's the place where the creativity happens. And I guess actually I can say I don't know how much this deals with. I don't know how much this comes up inside the cyberpunk setting because I have a few ideas about it, but this kind of allows me to talk about a couple of things which I mentioned really early on in the cyberpunk setting. And that's kind of my favorite little historical quirk, which is after World War II, during the U.S. occupation of Japan, there was a guy, a statistician, I believe, and I think he had worked, I believe he worked for the U.S. government prior to that role. But a guy named W. Edwards Deming kind of came over to aid with that reconstruction effort. And he brought what is now kind of known as Six Sigma. I feel that there's a few embellishments that have happened over time, but essentially he brought sort of a way of managing companies and measuring output and specifically variability that led to quite a bit of success in business. And the reason why I like highlighting that particular story, I'm obviously giving a simplified version of it, but one of the really common features of just about any cyberpunk story that you see will be there's usually quite a bit of Japanese culture, Japanese writing. And this is, of course, because at the time that these were written, you have these very successful Japanese conglomerates. They are outproducing the United States. The United States is undergoing some relatively on a relative basis, they're kind of experiencing a productivity slowdown. And it sort of feels like, Japan is winning everything. They're buying up American companies. They're out-competing. And, obviously there are parallels with that worry today, and you can actually argue that some of the policies that people want to enact are reflections of that time. But for authors and filmmakers looking to show, a future dystopia where, freedom is gone and America isn't even run by Americans anymore, having, all of these Japanese conglomerates buying everything up and everybody living in this corporate dystopia is kind of a reflection of the time. And in fact, you even have things like I think it was Shadowrun has like New Yen as a currency. So again, a lot of this has its origins in the work of W. Edwards Deming. I actually have his book Out of the Crisis on my shelf. And it's the reason why I wanted to bring it up today is not really to relitigate that particular issue. I'm sort of filibustering the session, but I wanted to at least get the start of the mission. Although I'm curious how I can... Okay. I'm kind of used to a few invisible walls in Doom, so I want to see what a little urban exploration will get me. But on the note of product, I mean, so one thing for me is that I've been on a bit of a productivity rant for a while, and I kind of appreciate that this is largely mirroring a bunch of stuff that we're seeing from tech companies. I don't necessarily think that I'm saying I'm not under any illusions that tackling productivity right now is a particularly original choice. However, I do think that there are better and worse ways of tackling that topic, and I think for the most part, I think a lot of the stuff we're seeing in the tech sector tend to be the worst ways of dealing with that issue. So I think the example that I give here, and this is kind of where the parallel with Cyberpunk comes in. When you see business people talk about productivity, a lot of times it becomes this euphemism for layoffs. And it's funny, right? Because you could imagine under normal circumstances where they say, we need to retreat, we need to do all these layoffs, we're not making enough money, people would consider that a failure. And I will go so far as to say, I can't always diagnose what's gone wrong at a company. And I think any model of employment that says no layoffs are acceptable under any circumstance probably doesn't give a business enough dexterity to be able to handle it. Like in those cases, what you are effectively committing to is a certain fraction of businesses have to fold. And whether the workers are better off in that scenario, I think there's probably some debate about it. But I think an unfortunate reality is that there are some situations in which layoffs become necessary or maybe are the lesser evil or what have you. But, the thing is I think to a certain extent what's happened is that there is a certain degree of rebranding that's occurred so that people who are undergoing what would normally be considered a negative for the business instead are rebranding it as a positive. And I mean, to a certain extent, you will see for these companies in a lot of cases when there are layoffs, you will actually see share prices go up. But of course, the problem with that, and you will actually see even game companies, which don't always have the best reputation for this sort of stuff, some of them will actually push back against that trend, and they will point out that, the people that they hire are actually quite important to producing the products on which the revenue depends. So if you scale back your production, then it's hard to sustain the workforce that you have. But I think the better way of thinking about the layoff situation is that you hired these people for a reason. If there was a problem with the hiring process, that reflects on management. That doesn't reflect on the employees. And on the other hand, if you're if you're doing it to sort of appeal this short-term market perspective, what you're ultimately doing is you're separating yourself from not just a group of people who you thought were capable for the work at the time, but you're actually doing, you're removing all of that work that's kind of gone into sort of socializing them and making them productive workers within the context of your own company. And so it's sort of doubly impactful in terms of what's lost. I mean, those are sunk costs, so that's not going to be a forward decision-making part. But of course, the real concern is that you also equip your competitors with some good employees, specifically ones who know your methods. So this is also why you will see companies like Apple. There have been cases in the history of that company where they actually hire and invest during economic downturns. Now, part of that is because they could afford to do so, but the other factor there is they recognize the benefit of sort of having a brightest and best. And of course, they, at least on paper, and I know Steve Jobs has talked about this in interviews, definitely also have some fairly strict standards in terms of hiring. I'm trying to see, this might be the level that we started the game on. I'm curious. Okay, so sorry, there was a reason to bring this up in relation to productivity. So this is the thing, right? You have a corporate dystopia, you have the, all of these excesses as perceived by the authors of these stories. And of course, the idea of companies doing layoffs just to make a buck, that's right at the top of bad corporate practices. And I'll even say that is not an unjustified criticism, right? There are definitely a lot of people with low I don't know if I should say low scruples, low standards, who maybe don't have a very imaginative way of thinking about, wait, where'd the guy go? Don't have imaginative ways of thinking about the circumstances, right? So if you're an unimaginative CEO and you see some kind of problem, and it's like, okay, we need to get we need to make more money. Let's fire a few people, or we need to get the margins up. Let's fire some people. Again, that probably there are ways that you can do moves like that to make certain financial statements look pretty good, but whether or not that's consistent with the long-term health of the company, that's another question. So I guess I haven't read this one before. Emergency on demand. How did it happen? When and why did we as a society decide that human life is a commodity, a luxury? My mother passed away at 45. She still had decades of life to live until it was all stolen from her by common pneumonia. If she held even the cheapest trauma team policy, she could have been cured within an hour, but she couldn't afford it. My mother died 5 months before a scheduled appointment with her family practitioner. The idea of privatized healthcare is deeply ingrained in our public psyche. Already in 2020, there was widespread consensus that $500 a month was a fair price for trauma team insurance. Health wasn't something you were given, it was something you earned. The private system may not be perfect, but there's no alternative, we thought. Bullshit. Now cross the Pacific Ocean to the USSR, where they also have highly trained medical technicians, high-precision nanosurgical suites, specialized antibodies, intravenous probes, the list goes on. Emergency airlifts using modern AVs equipped with cryotonic chambers. They have those too. The difference then? They don't leave their people to die on the streets, at the store, in their homes. They don't force anyone to purchase their lives from a corporation as if they're the ones who own it. Public health care isn't some unachievable utopia. It is a reality. Trauma team, on the other hand, treats its policyholders as both potential patients to be treated and potential products to be bought. They save lives only because there's a profit in it. A saved life is a returning customer. Client death can bring in fiscal gains in the form of organ and implant resale, though of course in regulated smaller sums. An emergency care provider can't afford to give its managers reasons to deliberately kill off its clientele base for short-term windfalls. Surely, you ask, these medical professionals are also guided by their Hippocratic oaths. please. Hello, Jamie. How you doing tonight? But yeah, so one of the reasons why I've lost the plot a little bit in terms of going on too long, but the reason why I kind of wanted to address this topic, it's also kind of neat to see that that old location again. I didn't realize that we were that close to the spot. But yeah, trying to address this idea of productivity. So the way, and I've written about this in a couple of articles, I think the slightly more effective way to think about productivity is this idea of pushing out the frontiers of what's possible. So for me, the analogy I kind of like to make would be for writing. Yeah, no worries, Jamie. I don't take attendance. And I know on Wednesday, Friday, and Monday between the local dev meetup and then the Easter weekend, I also wasn't streaming for a few days. So, but I've kind of been between games. So I've been enjoying Uncle Chop's Rocket Shop for the last few days. And I'm feeling like probably Hellblade 2 is the next one up. I may be starting that on Monday, actually. I think you were the one who requested that. I could be mixing it up, but yeah. Anyway, so to me, I think the unimaginative version of productivity, and this is the one that you see a lot of tech bros talking about. Intel just sort of did this kind of announcement too. It's cut so that you can achieve some sort of accounting, counting objective. Whereas ideally what you see in terms of productivity is this expansion of horizons. So a good example for me would be if I get better at writing, right? If I, learn a turn of phrase, if I read some essays that I really like, if I find some way of saying even more in fewer words, all of these would be positive quality improvements for my writing. And so as a result, for any hour spent writing, because I'm a better writer, my output is higher. By definition, I've become more productive. Another way would be if I have the same quality of writing, but I learn a little bit more discipline, or maybe I get a bit more comfortable with some of the features of Microsoft Word or Scrivener or, whatever, or the blogging platform. There's a few different options there. If I can write an article and edit it faster, again, I become more productive because I'm able to create the same number of articles in less time. Or I can produce more articles in the same period of time. And so, again, I think there's a really positive way of looking at this as simply saying that you can push out the frontier of possibilities rather than it being, So the example that I gave you is one way you can see why this is seen as a negative thing, right? When I say I can, I can spend less time on writing because on a quality adjusted level, I can produce the same amount in less time. One option is to take that time and spend it on leisure rather than on writing. All right, I'm tempted now to... Nuts. I just wanted the stuff. But yeah, so I mean, with that in mind, if it's not my time, and instead that's, person hours, that's someone who's not me, and instead an employee, then that does sound like a layoff. But of course, companies tend to want to grow. And so the better thing, of course, is to simply produce more. And then, of course, you have more product at, again, the same or lower costs. And of course, that means more profit in the end, which generally tends to be the thing that you see these companies wanting to make. there are also a few stories that you can tell along the lines of productivity increasing wages, or at least being associated with wage gains. All right, it's probably going to be a little bit of game audio. Maybe not. So the reason why I'm kind of babbling about all of this stuff is that when you are dealing with a game like Cyberpunk, which is critical, of course, the idea of all of these layoffs stemming from productivity improvements, that's going to be coming up probably more often. You know what? I wonder if there's a camera for me to look at. Probably not. I don't know if it's that wise for me to go down in an elevator just because I don't really know what I'm going to find here. That's me. That looked like a camera over there, but... So I think it's pretty clear that I'm going to have some... I'm going to have to find some way to disable the cameras as I move through. But... Anyway, yeah, so to return to the idea of these criticisms and how they might relate to productivity. One thing that I really liked about this game was there is in fact a line that in some of the sort of the writing, like it's one of the documents that you can find. It talks about how even an executive at this period of time actually does not really have a better life than, you know, people from, at least I'm pretty sure it's this game. But it sort of talks about how the quality of life has declined to sort of this point where the wealthy don't actually enjoy that. Like, they enjoy a good lifestyle relative to other people. But of course, we live, I think most people who are able to watch a Twitch stream live in a pretty affluent country. And so that's one thing that I actually really liked about the way this game sort of handled its topics and its themes. You can still have kind of the critique in there, but there's a clever observation that's being made, which is to say that, you know, you have this increasing, definitely increasing inequality. You have people who are, you know, definitely worse off. But the idea, too, is that, and this is kind of an outcome that you would get from a standard economics analysis or text or analysis of the kind of world that this game describes. The pie is shrunk, right? So, you know, there's a really common kind of conservative talking point where, you know, you want to make the pie bigger. So that, you know, there may be more people at the top who are enjoying, the prosperity, but even the people at the bottom are better off than in the alternative. And the thing is, there are some cases where you can actually justify that view. Like as is usually the case, it's hard to articulate those. It's hard to really make the case in those simplest possible terms. Usually, what you need to do is you need to bring up the specifics. Take a look at what's being proposed. Take a look at the current situation. It's a little bit like, I don't know if any of you have heard of the Laffer curve, but it's like this idea where you have sort of it's really not even, I don't know how empirically justified it is, but it's just this sort of idea that you have this upside down U for tax policy. So if you imagine a graph and you have like 0% taxes on the left hand side of the horizontal line, and then you have 100% taxes on the right-hand side of the horizontal line. You could draw an upside-down U from, the 0 to the 100. And the vertical axis that the U is tracing, basically that gives you an idea of of the government revenues. So the idea here is that there's no government revenues if there's no taxes, right? But likewise, there's no government revenue if there's 100% taxes, for the simple reason that why would you work at all if all of your money is going straight into the government coffers? And the intuition behind the Laffer curve is that if you are on the right-hand side of that U, a tax decrease will actually raise government revenues. Now, the problem here is that I don't know, like a lot of people will highlight this and will advocate for it. But I don't know how you decide whether you're on the left or right-hand side of that curve. And in fact, I think it's fair to say in, the 2020s, we've already gone through. I mean, the reason why we have big mega corporations and the evils of capitalism is that we've already gone through that period of a lot of, tax cuts and regulation. There was, in fact, probably a time in history where that was a pretty decent idea, because people had gone down a different economic path. But, even the logic of the Laffer curve tells you that you can't actually always decrease taxes and get to that 0 level. So again, the idea of growing and shrinking pies kind of works in a few different ways. But what I kind of like is that Cyberpunk recognizes that, you have the big evil corporations, and there's this growing wealth inequality, but that ultimately one of the great tragedies of these megacorps is not just that, there's tremendous grinding poverty, because of course it's a video game, right? You're not going to be one of those people, who has to just scrape by to make a living. You're going to be someone who's sort of living in a libertarian playground, like, most post-apocalyptic zombie games. You're going to be one of the people who, you're the main character, you get to do all the fun stuff. You get to live it up. But it does point out that even by the standards of you and I, we've actually lost a whole lot in this world. And we just simply don't know any better because of what's gone through. By the way, this was not the productivity point I was originally wanting to make, but it was one I remembered from the game. I should have checked, so I could do an FF55. I think that's going to be my best bet here. Now I could try the E9 7A, but I don't think I have another E9. So yeah, I should have stuck with the FF55. I saw purple. There we go. This is so much easier when I have the sufficient technical level. Archive conversation, Goichi and Kana. You there? Here, what's up? Wired Head, it's blown. For a while now, too many know about it. Show up without invites. See the NCPD swoop in yourself. Blue boys don't concern me. Those actual wireheads from Maelstrom, they're getting gutsy. Better to avoid a Better to avoid a jump from them. Thanks for the tip. No problem. Good luck. I do like that they get the texting style down right, but it does make it a little hard to read sometimes.
Come to Papa.
And to think so many people died.
Sorry, Keanu, I didn't realize you weren't finished. Okay, let's do... So if I can get the E9 FF, that's best. Okay, but that doesn't get me the 1C. Oh, nuts. I messed up. I don't think I've got anything left.
Like for this tiny little shit speck.
It's not the size that counts.
Both you and I know no one actually believes that.
Okay. I'm going to clear out the rest of this level. Sorry, like I said, I haven't been feeling 100%, so I realize rambly is one side effect of that. But unfortunately, so is losing track. I will try to be a little more on the ball, but right now I'm going to focus on cleaning out the level. But yeah, sorry, Jamie, the one thing I should say, the only thing I'm a little self-conscious about is I know I haven't been the most consistent on starting stream. So I will try to be better for that in terms of Hellblade 2. But the one thing that I can say, I don't know if you use Twitter or not, but I always do tweet before starting the stream, and if it helps for scheduling, if it feels like I'm going to be later... Hey, Daily Daybreak, I saw that you were doing some Rift of the Necrodancer today. It's just I was trying and failing to get started for this. And so I didn't want to interact because I know that with your stream, I would probably wind up watching it for a bit rather than starting my own. So I'm sorry I wasn't a little bit more social. For those of you who don't know, I'm going to try and avoid tabbing out of the... I'm going to try to avoid tabbing out of the game, but I will use my phone. Excuse me. Congratulations. Now, that's not the same achievement from when I visited last time, right? That's on top of what you already achieved. If I'm sorry, I don't remember the specific song that you were doing, so I realize that I may be asking a stupid question here. Also, I realize I always call you Delude Daybreak, but it's actually Deluded Daybreak. And unfortunately, I've really... I hope I got that right. D-A-L-U-D-E. Okay. Anyways, you can also click on their username and hit the follow button as well. Last time you broke into the top 400 on Sluggers. Okay, excellent. So I remember you were talking about your 500, but I know you'd said that you'd just crossed a threshold when I visited last. But in any case, I'm very, very happy to hear that you've gone even further. So I think probably all of the stuff for me to shout out has the wind has kind of been taken out of my sails for that. Deluded Daybreak, and I'm really gonna try and not say Delude Daybreak again, but it's hard because I've sorry, just 1 second here. But yeah, I can also can call you Nimbus. All right, Nimbus works as well. It's really more about what you prefer. I think the big one for me is I will do my best to remember after correction. But unfortunately, because I'm very often distracted when reading a chat, I'm not always going to be able to properly recall names. Now, if I have to type them out, that makes it a little bit easier. But of course, with tab completion, I very rarely type names out. So it's the advantage of doing it on mobile every once in a while, I suppose. But for those of you who don't know Deluded Daybreak, aka Nimbus. Oh, neat. Okay, cool. But originally they found the channel through Rift of the Necrodancer. Now, I did not realize Deluded Daybreak broadcast at the time. Or actually, maybe it was a raid. But in any case, what I knew a bit about the Rift of the Necrodancer. Actually, no, I don't think you did raid. I'm trying to remember if you just visited or if you had raided, but either way, it was an absolute pleasure to sort of interact on the channel. And then, of course, I eventually... Okay, fair enough. So I was... it was hard just because I remember your name specifically because you were so pleasant to interact with in chat. So I couldn't remember if you had just visited while I was playing the Rift demo or if you had raided. But either way, clearly made an impression. So when I finally got around to checking out the stream for myself, I found not just someone who was good at the brace yourself games that I really enjoy, so Crypt of the Necrodancer, Rift of the Necrodancer, so on. But I also happen to know that Deluded Daybreak streams Oblivion. And this, of course, was before the remaster of Oblivion came out. But for those of you who don't recall these, there was a while where, because I had never really got into Skyrim, I wanted to try and appreciate the Elder Scrolls series by playing all of the games, the main games from the Elder Scrolls Arena, all the way to, well, whichever one I ended on. So I've gotten to Oblivion at this point. But the fun hook on it was because I knew that there was the Dark Elf voice from Morrowind. It was the one thing that I kind of knew from the Elder Scrolls series with some reliability. I did decide to play, and then I did a little bit of research in terms of the setting. I decided to play the game as the same Dark Elf from Arena to Oblivion. Now, I understand that there was a trick that I did on this, which was I actually took a look at the estimated ages for the various races. And so it is plausible that you can, in fact, have a character that plays from Arena to Skyrim. They'd be quite old, right? So it would be a fairly unusual event, but I don't think it's impossible in the context. I think it would be impossible unless you were genuinely an immortal character to go from like online to Skyrim, because I think at that point you're dealing with a timeline of like thousands of years. But I think from Arena to Skyrim, it's a very long period of time, but it's not one that is impossible in terms of the durations of the lives of mortal characters in that setting. So anyways, the gimmick on that has just been that I've played as the same Dark Elf from the start of Arena up to and completing Oblivion, which was very fun. But Deluded Daybreak is doing a Sheogorath cosplay. Actually, usually has some fun details. In fact, provided a recipe in the Discord, so I'm always very happy to see people interacting in there because I know I don't give people a lot of reasons. And I guess because I've been spending so much time talking about it, I think it's really up to you now to just follow that channel and see what's up. But somebody I'm very happy to see inside of the channel, and somebody I'm always happy to meet in their own place as well. And I think one of the reasons why I was quite excited to shout out was just because I've had the chance to see some Rift gameplay, because I was not expecting the stream to come back as quickly as it did. So that was a treat for me. So if I did the FF, I don't think I can do the 1C. Oh no. Yeah, so this one gets tough without messing with some distractions. So
And here I thought I won the Darwin Award. I guess we have a new winner.
all right. So let's see what the distract enemies will do. Yep. I think that does the trick. I think as a bonus, I'm going to do this distract over here. So when I've blown stealth before, it's usually because distract enemies is one of the last things that I do in a level. And it's not... So the funny thing about this is, it's not because I necessarily forget about it. But there's a funny thing that happens in games like this. I could have sworn I read new release BDs, but phew, that's hot. Volume 3, Return of the Psycho, Piece by Piece, The Executioner's Diary, No Parachute Plummet, Scream Baby Scream, and On the Edge. So I don't think there's any... I don't want to get too close to that gentleman anyway. I was thinking I'd just zap out their... like do the... I can't remember if it's system crash or if there's a different... different detail. Anyways. Neither here nor there. You know, that gesture really doesn't work when you've got Milfgard playing in the background. Or I guess it works a little too well. It makes me feel like I'm playing a different kind of game. I wonder if there's a way to... No, I'd have to augment myself. I think the time's come for me to just finish the mission. All right, sorry. Again, I realize I've been kind of all over the map on topics. Don't think I've finished a single thought over the course of this stream. I'm sort of feeling the side effects of feeling, oh yes, I seem to remember there's a bit of a fight here. That almost went bad for me. I didn't even notice. Well, I tried to make that non-violent. Well, okay, sorry. I don't think you can non-violently whack someone with a baton, but non-lethal. But yeah, like I said, I wasn't feeling 100% before the broadcast, and I'm getting waves of it every once in a while. I should be able to manage it, but I'm just having a little difficulty keeping focused. All right, James Ishihara and Kuniko Aso got some biz. Store on Broad Street. Slap on the wrist or bullet to the brain. Bullet. Doesn't want to pay? Why not? Says he doesn't need protection. So a gonk. Even hired some hustle of his own. Zero the whole bunch. Mercs are animals. Animals. Stop. I don't even know where the drop point is. One other feature that I wasn't expecting to talk about today, but gives me a chance to talk about an Apple TV Plus show I kind of like.
I see you were able to find the lock breaker. Splendid work. Keep it up. Closing the contract.
I'm also going to take a minute just to sell out my inventory a little bit. But the idea of sort of the industrialization of space, I don't know how... Actually, I'm out of curiosity. Is there anybody in chat who has read Neuromancer? It's been a while, so for those of you that have read it, you may even remember it better than I do, but... Okay, Ashura, Nakatama, Grad, Achilles, Sawar, Copperhead, Sidewinder, Umbra, Tsune, Ajax, Maki. So I'm tempted to just drop the light machine gun because it's so heavy, but Pulsar, Dian, Guillotine. Okay, so we've got two of those. This one has 3, but this one's a ++. So now it may make more sense for me to hang on to the one that has more slots because of the theoretically I can upgrade an existing high slotted weapon, but maybe we'll just get like what this does is this ensures that I have more stuff. Actually, it did occur to me I don't necessarily need them. Well, that's not entirely true. I'll buy out my cyberware, and then I'll start turning the parts into components again, or turning the weapons into components. Okay, both pluses. So one of the things that I think is maybe unexpected if you have not if you're not familiar with the book, I mean basically if you're reading it for the first time would probably be a more straightforward way of putting it, is that, and particularly if you're familiar with Cyberpunk through maybe some of the following games, it's maybe a little surprising to find out that if I recall correctly, Neuromancer ends in space. And of course, if you are writing or, reading a science fiction story, I guess around the 80s, I think it's perfectly sensible that a story might, finish in space. Why wouldn't you do that? It's a science fiction story after all. And you have this idea of the industrialization of space, but V, my dear, the hard work you have invested with me has multiplied your returns. People utter your name with respect. This is an honor, but also a responsibility. Remember that well. I have new contracts from highly placed clients that do not tolerate forgetfulness. But what I think is kind of interesting about this is that, the conventions of cyberpunk really hadn't been established when Neuromancer was being written. I mean, it's largely the book that sort of, I don't want to know if I should say defined them, but certainly it was very influential and recognized as a really interesting and original book at the time. And I don't know if you would say that, all science fiction had to deal with space, but I think probably there was a pretty reasonable idea of saying, it's like, okay, well, there's going to be this advancing, I think there's going to be this progress, and, we seem to be going to the moon, we're going into space, so, we'll just push that forward, but we'll give it the layer that, the rest of the book is applying to the future. Whereas now, I think a lot of cyberpunk is kind of reflecting our current age. And of course, with the benefit of several decades since Neuromancer, we've seen sort of this move away from space until very recently. Of course, now we're seeing private space exploration. So if anything, it's definitely becoming more cyberpunk. But in this case, you see kind of this turning inward, right? It's definitely focusing a lot more on the critique. It's focusing a lot more on individuals. And again, in some cases, you can see it's making the libertarian paradise in which you can do a bunch of badass things because you're a rebel. There's a few different ways that you can cut it, and it depends on the story largely in terms of what you get. I remember some people didn't care for Shadowrun because they're just sort of like, you're taking this cool cyberpunk stuff and you're throwing Tolkien at it. Like, what are you doing? Although I think actually there's a Shadowrun adaptation that I think is kind of neat, but I'll deal with that later. But there is something kind of neat about it, right? I think the thing that I always find so interesting about it, about kind of going down these digressions and these paths, is that when you are reading a story written from a certain time or a certain perspective, you are getting a view on the world, and sometimes you're getting the fun stuff of just, here's a crazy ride that someone came up for you, and you can enjoy it. It's a fun book. I really like Neil Stephenson, so he's quite good at...
V, got a simple, clean-cut gig. Need you to zero someone who's been extorting regular, hard-working folks. Our public enemy's name is Blake, and he is one slippery motherfucker. More info on him and his MO attached.
All right, gun for hire. Blake Croyle. Oaba on O'Malley's Place Street. Racketeering's the name of the game in Kabuki. The badges pretend like they don't see when hustlers like Blake reel in the next victim. The script's always the same. Act 1, a promising money deal. Act 2, an unpayable debt. The sucker this time was Roger Wang, store chain owner. Blake's already seized ownership of one of the stores, but has bigger plans. Like I said, this kind of debt's unpayable, so Wang got wise and paid us instead. This human shit-stained Croyle is about to disappear, so the time to act is now. And one more thing, Blake's got hustle from the animals watching his back.
What? Guys, please don't shoot.
They changed their. All right, yeah. By the way, I totally forgot. I was talking in the Braindance Club, but didn't finish this idea. So one reason why I'm actually kind of bad at some of the stealth elements, it's the lack of using distractions. But it does invite the question, like, why don't I use those distractions? And it's not usually because I've forgotten about them. But there is usually this nice predictability in terms of all of the characters' movements. So generally, I feel like I can get a handle on that and move on. Now, the problem with that is that there are clearly some points where you can't rely on, on the movement patterns, that you do in fact need to disrupt them in order to be able to get the you need to, how do I put it? Like, you have two characters looking at each other. So I was wondering in that case, because it's wide open, so you have fewer cases where you can distract the enemy. Like, so how am I going to work at this time? Do I need to, do I need to do the system collapse and then sneak up behind the other guy while that's happening? As it happens, you just wait for them to finish their joke and they go walking along. But that's one of the things I've been trying to learn in these stealth sections. So again, that's at least one conversational thread that's been snipped. I might take a break after this one. But archive conversation, Ben Azaria and Sasquatch. We're at Blake's, and what the fuck are you bothering me for? Because here, T, fuck off. Here they got an ingredient for juice. Lidocaine. Lidocaine, you fucking piss brains. Might come in handy. Then take it. Should we ask Blake first? Because it's like his. Ask your dick if it's got balls. Not something a lot of games allow, but more freeform storytelling instead of stealth. I prefer more... Yeah, no, that's a good point, actually. It's funny that you mentioned that, Daily, because a couple of times that I've... or deluded, sorry. It feels really inappropriate to call you deluded, though. But I actually have talked a couple of times where it feels... How do I put it? Like... I actually don't have anything from CD Projekt Red to suggest this. I think this might even just be based off of maybe like a dev diary or fair enough. Or it could have been an interview or something like that. But I got this impression that for a while, one of the points of reference for this game was like immersive sims like Deus Ex. And like this idea that you could, you could have multiple ways of playing or beating the game. Now, I always feel kind of 50-50 on this. I'll give you an example, because I do feel that I'm a little harsher on immersive sims than I should be. But if you read the manual to the first Elder Scrolls game, Arena, they're perfectly upfront in terms of saying, we want you to do anything in this game. We like playing D&D. We love the idea that there is a game where you can do anything. We love playing that around a tabletop. And we asked ourselves, how do we do this in a video game? And this is that video game. Now, if you've played Arena, you are probably going at, in 2025, you are probably going to be very far away from the experience that they are describing in that manual. But that's a pretty clear statement of intent. And I will say the possibilities that are opened by that game. I remember beating the final boss by like magically conjuring walls to sort of block them off while I did the magic stuff that I needed to do. And like I would levitate all over the place. And it was really the move to 3D, like Morrowind and Oblivion, that really started constraining some of that potential. Because like, how are you going to make a game where you can levitate, and have these fully realized 3D environments? Like even Grand Theft Auto 5 doesn't have enough like landscape for people to be able to, you know, to do that. I mean, effectively you're looking at kind of a game like Anthem at that point. And, you know, even Anthem had its constraints, but not enough people played it to find the constraints, I guess. So I will confess, actually, I think, if I'm honest, I think Arena does a pretty good job of delivering on that ambition. Although I do think it's at a point where I, the player, am imposing a bit of imagination on it, because it's not like I sit down and I look at the, you know, the pixels and I say, oh yes, you know, this is basically like virtual reality. I feel like I'm, you know, a fantasy hero. But I still think it's I think it does a good job, and I think it achieved more of the you can kind of do anything feeling than I think a lot of other games have. But I know since at least Arena, and I really just point to that one, not necessarily because it was the first, but rather just because it's one where they really plainly stated in the manual. But I feel like there's a lot of games, like it's interesting to listen to the podcast Designer Notes, because there are so many game designers who do not necessarily talk about early or formative game experiences being video games, although they always talk about those because, you know, Soren Johnson asks them what their first video game is. But a lot of them actually do talk about playing tabletop role-playing games. And I think there's something about that because, of course, I imagine tabletop role-playing has more of the qualities that would eventually turn you into a game designer in terms of just coming up with ideas and, you know, exercising your imagination and such. Not suggesting that you can't exercise your imagination in video games, but I think it flexes a set of muscles that are a little bit more aligned with creation rather than the consumption of entertainment. Although, you know, you have both, clearly. But it really has not left me that original idea. And so I was really intrigued when a coworker of mine played Divinity Original Sin 2. And they were not like a big gamer. But apparently they'd heard about Divinity Original Sin 2, and they asked if I was, you know, if I would recommend it. And I says, like, I don't really have a good idea of what you're into, but kind of described, you know, computer role-playing games and what you get out of them. And, you know, that's probably a good one to play if you're, you know, if you're into that sort of thing. And I was fascinated. I like, he'd played stuff before, but it was like Darkest Dungeon because I'd recommended that to him. And I remember really distinctly, I might even still have the text from him actually, like just seeing this text message about a couple hours after I know he started playing the game. And he said, I feel like I can do anything in this. And of course he's right. You know, that's the, that really is a game that has enough interactions with all of its different items, that even though it is not literally true that you can do anything in the game, the possibilities that you can't do are largely ones that you just simply don't think about and don't want to do. So this allows me to get to Diluted Daybreak's comment. I mean, I think modern games often disregard the power of imagination. I understand some people apparently need their 120 FPS with ray tracing. I definitely do. But as a kid, I would always imagine a little skateboarder riding along the highway guardrails. It feels like a skewed set of priorities. No, I agree. I think that's actually one of the reasons why the productivity stuff I talked about earlier, I was going to try and fold that into gaming, but I've obviously lost the plot on that, so I'm not going to try and resurrect it. But the idea of exercising imagination. So in one sense, you've got the text-based adventure games, and I can see why that would be, you wouldn't want to limit gaming to that, because I feel that that's maybe doing a little too much work for the imagination, but it's not distinguishing itself enough from other written works, right? So at that point, you might as well just read a good book. But there's this neat little space, and I think the indie space is the ideal place for it, although it's not always indies who fill it in. But the very simplified art styles that are cheaper to make. So of course for me, or less expensive to make, for me the ideal here would be a Book of Hours or a Cultist Simulator. Like Cultist Simulator has a really distinct visual style to it, that is instantly recognizable, right? If you look on Steam and you see a Cultist Simulator image as an avatar, you found an interesting person. By the way, I do need to go to the bathroom, so I'll probably take a small break. I wanted to wait to the end of the mission, but I don't think I can hold out. I've been talking too long. But that game is told through cards, and that one allows a lot of imagination. Actually, tell you what, there's a little more I have to say about it, but I suspect you do too, Diluted Daybreak. So I think I'll take my break now. We'll wrap up the thought, and then we will progress with the mission. I realize it's going to be more of a just chatting stream than a Cyberpunk stream tonight, but I think it's what I need just to get myself back on track. But I'll be back in a little bit, and we can carry on after. Okay, sorry. I realize this is a bit of a clown show of a stream tonight, but Deluded Daybreak actually got to where it was. It's so this is so interesting because you're actually pointing out the very example I was gonna mention. So you kind of beat me to the punch. But we were talking about the room for imagination in terms of games and how in some cases that can be abandoned in the name of sort of higher fidelity. Of course, these are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Sorry, I missed the earlier message. I can probably find it on. No, I can't. All right, I think I can go in here. But yeah, so in this case is I will never forget the sheer wonder I felt the first time I saw that entry transition for the Shivering Isles and beheld a pink and gold sky. Yeah, for me, that moment when it's not Hawthorne, is it? Anyways, the servant of Sheogorath in Shivering Isles, when he closes the door, and then it transition, the walls become butterflies, and you're confronted. Haskell, thank you. That was an amazing transition. So like Oblivion, in its original form, is not exactly known for the beauty of its characters, let's say. But my God, that moment of just seeing the walls flutter away and basically find yourself in a dream world was amazing. And I'm probably doing a similar experience to Deluded Daybreak, in that I played this as an adult, right? I mean, the game was out when I was younger, but I'd never played it again. I'm coming to the series quite late. So anyways, the Oblivion Master is a fun novelty, but the original was a life-changing experience for me. I don't know if that's strange to say about a fantasy game, but there's just something about it. It hit a sweet spot where the limitations and quirks of the world didn't hamper the life that your mind breathed into it. Now, of course, it's worth bearing in mind I was introduced to these games as an adult, and I was able to appreciate them from an adult's perspective. I'm not sure I would feel much the same way about Oblivion and Morrowind if I had played them in my teens. But then again, there's only so much we can speculate on with regards to history, as it didn't happen. And I think my fondness for the older Elder Scrolls games, despite the jank, comes from the fact that the setting is an invitation to navigate a world of ideas and dreams. The world is a dream, and you're taking part in the dreaming that dream. I think that's exactly right. And I think, for me at least, so this is one of the reasons why I'm always careful. I think it's very natural for people who like independent games to try and draw a contrast between, let's say, I'll stick with Bethesda just for simplicity, right? So imagining a Doom relative to, say, an experience like Oblivion. Although even then, I would say that Oblivion is certainly a very, that's a top tier game. That would be something that is a premium title. So even there, the comparisons not exactly, we're not talking about starving indies for any of these things here. But I can see why it would be very natural for. Well, actually, let's go so far. Let's compare. He's probably. Oh no, that's not an animal. But let's go for maybe a more realistic comparison that a fan of indie games would make, and let's say maybe it would be, Doom and FTL. So FTL is not going to beat Doom on visual fidelity. It's a wonderful game. I highly recommend it if you haven't played. But there's just no way that you're going to go to someone who likes Doom and say, did you like Doom? Did that heavy metal soundtrack really get your blood pumping? Did you like the way that the demons splattered when you killed them? Well, you really got to play this, this FTL game. No, you say you play FTL because, it's this wonderful, original challenge and, it takes a very old genre and it has this nice sort of individual. Also, you're beloathed. Yeah, I'm not great. Actually, I do have a special memory of FTL in that it was the first I got my first normal win in that game. In this apartment, before I even had any real furniture. I think I had a bed that I was playing on. But yeah, I was playing it on my laptop because my desktop had not yet arrived. So I was doing a minimalist stream after just moving here, and it was good. Like it was a convincing win too. I was convinced I was not going to be able to do it. I was just gonna I was doing some practice to warm up for like a serious run, and it just everything clicked, and I was like, okay, I've got it now. But yeah, I mean that's one where that one's maybe not specifically driven by its story. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have writing and imagination inside of it. But the fantasy of being sort of this space captain, and particularly the space captain in desperate circumstances, that is largely communicated through sort of the gameplay, the mechanics, and there's some work that your brain is doing to sort of create the situations. And I don't mean to suggest that people are imagining sort of a movie of what FTL looks like, but you really do get this feeling that you're sort of issuing those commands on the bridge, let's say, to try and make the best of a bad situation. I think all of the sort of stress and the planning that you imagine for a situation like that. I can't exactly say that I've been a leader of men in a crisis situation, so I can't speak from experience, but at the very least it provides a first approximation of what I kind of imagine that would be like. And to return it to this topic of sort of the feeling, another example of this, by the way, would be RimWorld, which I think Tynan Sylvester, the lead designer behind that, has been quite open about wanting it to be sort of this story generator, and it has a very simplistic art style to it, but it is calibrated in such a way that it expects you to sort of hit certain story beats at certain times, and there's a bunch of parameters that you can adjust to maybe tailor it to your own tastes. But very much the idea here is that you are given a set of constraints, and it's up to you to decide what you want to make of them. And I think there's something kind of interesting on that. And I think it's also, I think the question is academic as to whether or not that's something that players respond to, because clearly, FTL and FTL maybe isn't the best example of, a world of infinite possibilities, but RimWorld certainly is. And I mean, that's clearly a very successful game. And so those I feel that those take up the mantle of anything is possible a little bit better than using Deus Ex as an example of that. And even this game, because I like the variety that I have in terms of approaches that I can take. But when I play these, I do ultimately feel that what I am doing is I am trying to detect maybe one of three different paths that a designer put in front of me, as opposed to feeling like I've got sort of a recipe book of interesting situations. And I don't even want to say that that's a bad thing. I think Cyberpunk's very enjoyable. I enjoyed the time that I played of Deus Ex. I haven't played it to completion, by the way, but life's not over. And I like the fact that those options exist, but they don't, to me, hold up to that ideal of that feeling of possibility. I mean, for that, almost I go back to something like Arena, or I go to something today. Like, if I want an old game as an example of that, I would actually say The Sims, right? The Sims is a dollhouse. It's largely, premised on this idea that you kind of do, at least within the confines of like the real world. But I think that's a decent example of that as well. But I mean, not a lot of people hold that up as this great imaginative experience. But it's funny that the contrast gets made between sort of the AAA and the indie space, because I actually think there's room for both. Like, I think Oblivion is a really great example of how, and in fact Cyberpunk as well, because I really enjoyed at the end of Phantom Liberty how, with the performance capture, Johnny Silverhand, you're able to get the advantage of having Keanu Reeves as your, as the person portraying that character, because he's allowed to communicate with his eyes and his gestures, and you just simply wouldn't be able to do that with something like a PS2 graphic, even PS3. You really just don't have what it takes to be able to communicate those nuances in a way that make for a meaningful moment, right? So when you say, you've got something that you can trade with the NUSA, and you don't need to say it, there's just a gesture towards Songbird, that there is something more effective about that than having the character say, she betrayed you, so you could betray her and sell her to the NUSA. Obviously, that's a corny way of saying. I'm overstating the point, but I think you guys get what I mean. So I think that, and the Oblivion experiences that we're talking about are examples about how you can use the frontier of possibilities as a game designer. Essentially, if you're someone with considerable worldly resources to realize this vision, there are some possibilities that really do enhance the kinds of storytelling that you can do. And yet, I think so many of our best examples of entertainment products very often rely on the imagination, and that could be anything from reading a book, a radio play. Some of the games that we really enjoy that have these good stories, or at the very least create an interesting fantasy, are ones that are, if you look at it from a completely cold and distant perspective, you'd almost call these pieces of abstract art, right? People don't look like prison architect characters or, pixel art, right? Pixel art looks absolutely nothing. Well, okay, there's certain types of pixel art that, have a lot more detail, but the pixel art that people usually look at, that all looks almost nothing like a human being, right? It looks like a roughly human shape. It looks like an approximation of a human, but nobody's being fooled that these are real people. You don't play, Wolfenstein 3D and consider the morality of the human life that you've just ended. Arguably you don't do that on the modern Wolfenstein games, and those look really good. There, that place is open for both. Clearly, there are more people who are going to be working at the lower end than at the higher end, just because not everybody has lots of financial resources. But yeah, it's essentially there's room for both. But I think the constraints of the lower end sort of force good designers to explore more interesting places than maybe would normally be experienced. And it's sometimes fun to see how people get inspired by each other as well. I did talk about one of the Shadowrun adaptations, and I found out that the company that made that also adapted Starflight. And I actually think that they took lessons from Starflight into that Shadowrun game, but we can talk about that later. When you're playing through Crypt of the Necrodancer, you can trick yourself into feeling the chill of your blood running cold, your heart straining every time you miss a beat. Fancy graphics, simple graphics. What matters to me is that you can go there. Although not all games need to be a place, Rift isn't a place, and you love Rift of the Necrodancer. Yeah, well, I actually really got to do that again on stream, because I had a great one with that. Yeah, no, I think it's fair to say it's a conversation. So I'll read this archive conversation here, and then I can give you an example in terms of at least for how I stream and how that relates. So Blake Croyle, and got the Eddies, man, on our way. Got anything spicy for us to start with? Beatdown, curb stomp? You're just watching for now. Look tough, guard me. It sounds like a snooze job. Occasionally pop a knee, or deal with someone's wife, husband, kid, whatever. Nothing too complicated. Now that's more interesting. Should have started with that. So yeah, to me, definitely playing games is a conversation. One of the reasons why NC Nightlife drinks dancing debauchery. If you're a dance head like us, don't miss out on Lizzie's. You'll find no better brain dance club in the city, no matter how deep you dig. Modern boxes, solid tech. Most important, the catalog, chock full of nearly any experience you can imagine. You'll find everything you need to get you off, fast or slow, nasty or classy, and everything in between. Don't let the girls at the front door scare you off or kill your buzz. They're wary of newcomers, but once you get in, they'll treat you like one of their own. Trust us, give Lizzie's a try, and you'll never go anywhere else. Now, the afterlife, that's a different story. Sure, you can cut loose and have a good time there, but the afterlife is a place of business above all else. Want to meet a fixer about a job that needs doing, discuss important gig details with a client over drinks, or maybe just sit back and people watch to see the comings and goings of the NC Underworld's brightest merc and fixer names. The afterlife is a great place for all of the above, the only place really. If you're looking for the city's marquee events, find yourself at Riot, chart-topping playlists, live performances from the brightest stars, both local and from around the world, DJ battles, unique music shows, and media-packed album premieres. Sound like your scene? Don't miss out on Riot. I'm probably going to have to interact with a computer as well, so... my beloved debtors. 1, Adam Allen, Ripper, gave away med equipment, need to let it slide for now or my chum will hang himself. Roger Wang, shop owner, lots of meds and med equipment, has his own network, need to drain quick before the supply goes dry. James Spears, guy from the restaurant, stubborn, sent some pets to break his legs. Lily Mills, model, has to give up her apartment, unaffected by threats made to mother, should make good on threat anyway, prove her agency means biz. Debt, Roger Wang, Blake Coral, you're joking, I didn't borrow any from you, and we talked about a loan, that's it. Roger, time is money and mine ain't cheap, I gave you business advice, a service that isn't a charity. One more thing, could you pass along my warm regards to your daughter and congratulate her on her pregnancy? I'm sure you're real excited to be a grandpa, your daughter's got a fine place in Kabuki too, a real bright future ahead of her. Okay, I understand. Take the money, already sent your way, and don't you ever dare go near my family again. Sheesh, Raj, no need to get nasty. You hurt my feelings, you know that? As for what you said, it ain't enough. Silly you, forgot the interest. But actually, I just got a thought for a quick and convenient way for you to put a ribbon on this thing. Give me that little shop of yours in Kabuki and we're all square. Only this time, I could do without the attitude. I authorized you in the system, it's yours. Need someone to watch your back? Danger prowls Night City. Got a stalker on your tail? Hired iron out for your blood? Some freak giving you crooked looks and bad vibes, or maybe you're just looking to pad your personal security. The animals got your back. Survival of the fittest. It's the only law that matters in Night City. You hire us, we show your enemies just what that means. We'll protect you, your home, your workplace, your property. Hell, we'll even happily knock on a few doors if necessary. Become king of the jungle, choose the animals. So on the note of conversation, to me, I kind of go back to how I enjoy almost anything, almost any entertainment product that I like. Can I do this through the wall? No, I can't. I might run out and get it anyway, but... So, ideally if I'm reading a book, I don't want to suggest I do this for every book, but, you can read a book by putting your eyes over words on a page, but I think generally when people think of reading, they're thinking of something that they're quite absorbed in and they are engaging with. And I never really write in my books. I know some people love doing that and they really think that's the way to read. I've never quite felt like I can mark a book up. I do take notes when I write books sometimes though. Or, you're reading a fantasy book or some piece of fiction and it just transports you to another place. And so I think those are probably what people tend to think about when it comes to, what do we do? BD7A, BD. I don't think I have a 1C though. But again, I kind of blame this on working in movies for a bit, but I do actually find it hard to turn off the impulse to apply that same type of thinking to a movie. So when I watch a show, I will still enjoy it as a show. So I like watching Slow Horses. I think it's got some wonderful writing. I think it's a lot of fun to watch. But I am also quite conscious when I'm watching any kind of movie or show. So like Whiplash, there's a kind of a famous scene in it where a band teacher throws a throws a chair at the head of the one of the drummers in his band, and then he starts slapping him. And what they do in that scene, they move the camera across the line of action. So if you imagine two people looking at each other across a screen, right? So you have one character on the left-hand side and another character on the right-hand side, and the camera is perpendicular to the sight line between the two people. You can move the camera anywhere in sort of that half circle between the two characters, and the person on the left will be looking left to right, and the person on the right will be looking right to left. But as soon as you move outside of that half circle, the sight lines change. The person who is looking left to right winds up looking right to left instead. That's something that if you're directing a movie, ideally you will be aware of that, so that when you are covering a scene, there's consistency, so that you're not disorienting someone. But in the case of Whiplash, after each slap, they don't just cross that line, they go directly over it. So the camera's on the opposite spot, and each slap, the camera jumps over on each side. Now, of course, that's that's a really, really smart choice on the part of that director, because, unfortunately, I think most of you know what it's like to be hit. But if you are hit, particularly in the face, that is a massively, even if it's a slap, right? I've been, it probably won't surprise people to find I've been punched in the face. But yeah, even a slap, particularly from a teacher, is a massively disorienting thing. And it's a way that technically they're violating, good practices of filmmaking. But they're doing so because as a moviegoer, you are really experiencing what that student is feeling in that moment. So, when I watch a movie like Whiplash, really good movie, by the way, for those of you who haven't seen it, there's that surface level where I get to enjoy a good yarn. But on top of that, it's very hard for me to sort of turn that off. I remember watching Tenet 2 and, seeing a building sort of be reformed and then blown up at the top as the two sides of a battle are fighting at opposite ends of time. I remember just thinking, it's like, how on earth did they do that? And it was, again, a perfectly enjoyable movie. I got a lot out of it, just enjoying it as a film. But because I also would study to sort of learn the tricks, it's very hard for me to turn that off. But what's fun about it is I feel like I walk away with a lot more in terms of an understanding of the movie. And in that sense, I, again, feel like it's a bit of a conversation. And so likewise, in terms of games, finding out what's possible, finding, why are certain things in the places where they are, because of course, every game, you have to make a decision as to where things go through one form or another. So, of course, we live in an age of procedural generation where people are not necessarily handcrafting every level, but they at the very least have created a set of parameters to guide that creation. And so there's some choice somewhere being made in terms of what allows you to, what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. And so when you talk about a conversation, one of the things that I talk about most frequently, maybe talk too much about on the stream, is, some of these questions or these ideas, what is the game, was the game allowing me to do? Does that tell me something about what the game is about, maybe? And in that sense, again, I do really feel that it's a conversation as much as, watching a movie or reading a book is. Even though I do realize that there is a certain type of discourse that wants to just reduce games to sort of mindless, idiot boxes that that are a lesser form. And again, I not every game is worthy of sort of a deeper engagement. And certainly, it can be quite easy to get a bit elitist on this stuff if you're not careful. So I think it's important to always remember, people will, or ideally will enjoy games for what they are. Really should have thought this through. So I've got 2 options for E9. I don't think either of these 55s will give me the 1C though. YOLO? Yeah, no. Yeah, well, I mean, it's definitely, I mean, so it's, I do kind of think it depends on the viewer too, right? So I really like the movie Gladiator, right? I mean, that's not a particularly controversial view. I think, like, Gladiator is basically everybody's dad's favorite movie. But look, it's, it's a good movie. I will also go so far as to say that I have a very strong conviction that Gladiator is basically about rhetoric. And, to a certain extent, it's like, wait, the guy basically wearing a dress, with a sword, fighting tigers, the Are You Not Entertained movie.
Target bagged. Closing the gig.
We're talking that one. That one's about rhetoric, is what you're saying. To which my answer is yes. I think I've talked about it before. If those of you who are, I'll make that one an optional one. For those of you curious as to why I think it's about why I think it's about rhetoric, I'm happy to tell you, but I won't subject you to that. Now again, not every story is going to merit that. So there's an idea from writing. I think this is from science fiction. It's called Sturgeon's Law, and it goes roughly along the lines of 90% of science fiction is rubbish. But that's not so bad because 90% of just about anything is rubbish. So, and the idea that it's really trying to communicate here. Do I really want this fight? I don't feel it's appropriate to be in a Cyberpunk game and not and walk away from people who are blocking your your path. So yeah, sorry, not every, so the Sturgeon's Law, right? So, if I think around that time there was sort of this idea that science fiction was some kind of lesser literary form. I think we are well past that point now, right? Like, it's no longer a niche thing to be into science fiction or fantasy. In fact, I would argue that it is rarer now to see more conventional stories. Everybody's looking for the next big sci-fi or fantasy franchise because they're full of spectacle. Action is the universal language. You don't need to translate karate. You really, Marvel's science fiction and fantasy as much as anything, right? But yeah, so not everything's going to merit it. And again, it's never nice to be elitist or to be a bit closed-minded in terms of the things that you want to see. Like, I think in the end, if somebody wants to enjoy something that I would kind of consider to be pulpy and uninteresting, I don't need to try and convince them that what they're looking at is bad. But with that in mind, not every film that I've seen sort of merits or can sustain sort of this longer consideration. And I've definitely seen some films that I actually feel pretty strongly that I wish I hadn't watched them. So like I saw the movie Saw. A friend of mine, friend at the time, wanted me to see that, and I really couldn't find what the purpose of that was other than to show off sort of the practical effects of
Hey V, got this client. Not the brightest bulb in the bunch. Got himself into some serious trouble, needs to leave town ASAP. More intel attached.
Yeah, I couldn't find a whole lot of redeeming qualities in it, let's say. I know some people who like it. Obviously, it spawned different sequels. This might just be a hang up for me, but I remember them trying to kind of convince me of this profound story of like the meaning of life that they got out of it, and I was just really not convinced. But I also kind of accepted it as like, okay, so science fiction's going to seem kind of bad because there's going to be just a whole lot of vehicles that don't really care about the plot. They're just a chance to show off the computer generated special effects. And if you're a practical effects guy, well, you're probably going to want to make a horror movie, because a horror movie will allow you to show off all of your fancy practical effects, right? You can show an eyeball popping out of a head or something. And, of course, a lot of those stories are going to be pretty shallow because all of the, the plot is there to put you in situations to show off the thing that the filmmakers wanted to make inside of that. The same way that, I'm not convinced that I've written any kind of a story that people are like, that it would be worth their time to read. Right. There's a saying, everybody's got a book in them. And I think the follow up to it probably should be, and for most people, that's exactly where that should stay. Now, if there was an idea that I felt sufficiently compelled by, and if I felt like I could do some justice to it, I'd be very interested in putting that online and letting people read it. But in the end, right, not every story that comes out is going to be worthy of the kind of attention that you might put on to some of your favorites. I don't think it's reasonable to expect that of every single one, but that's of course not an indictment on the form so much as it is just, it's both a combination of what your tastes and your background sort of allows you to enjoy, as well as the individual merits of the work. So, I think Network's a brilliant film. I actually haven't run into anybody who doesn't like Network, but at some point there'll probably be somebody I know who like doesn't think Network's a good movie. Yeah, no problem. Deleted Daybreak. I'll just finish the last line that you say, last two that you said here. So I do enjoy older movies. Unfortunately, I think I've just felt a very corporate itch lately about what people have tried to get you to sit and watch. Yeah, well, I mean, so if you feel that you're watching something under duress or out of social obligation, that's really going to be hard to lose yourself in that. So I have a lot of sympathy for what you said. You think it's a difficult medium for you compared to games and books. With games, it's a steady series of questions and answers. With books, you can control the pace and divert your attention to address questions that might arise. Movies move in one direction at a fixed pace, and I feel like it doesn't work well with how you converse. And I agree with that as well. It's actually one reason why I like reading manuals more than I like video tutorials. But a lot of places are actually abandoning video tutorial or abandoning proper documentation in the name of video tutorials, because that's what most people prefer. But for me, that is the challenge, is that it is easier to leaf through a book than it is to scrub through a video player, right? There's one pace and there's a bunch of sort of filler, and I wind up spending more time fiddling around with a video tutorial rather than just sitting down and coming to terms with something. So anyways, I hope you have a good sleep, and we'll see you next time. All right, SOS, Merc needed. Huangbo, location motel on Martin Street. You know the classic comedy setup where a gonk gets into serious trouble and only some like misanthropic hard ass can save him? Well, let that be your guiding plot for today. The gonk in question is called Huangbo. He did some small-time work for the Tiger Claws, but instead of keeping his head down and being patient, he took a shortcut and stole from his own gang. Genius, right? Not only that, but the whole thing had his name written all over it. Huangbo's marked for death, meaning he has to disappear. The faster, the better. I already found him a nomad smuggler, but someone still needs to get him from one end of the city to the other. But if he's spotted out on the street, the Tiger Claws will know about it. You know what you got to do, right? So let's get to it. He's holed up somewhere in the motel on Martin. I think I remember this mission. Yeah, it doesn't give me a number. Okay. I like it when the trio falls in my lap. I'm kind of accepting that I'm not necessarily going to get every mission. If I recall correctly, the clients, I think, on one of the higher levels, maybe not. Yeah, this is me. No, not wardrobe. I wanted to see if I could do road tracer. Also, please tell me I'm... Yeah, okay. So sorry, I realize I haven't been doing a lot of missions, but hopefully this will cure what ails me. It is kind of interesting, actually, to see, for those of you who are here for the earlier conversation, it's kind of interesting to see Diluted's reaction to video games compared to movies. Because I think, you know, for a very long time, this ideal had been, you know, raise kids as readers. I remember telling Ellen Ripley that, I actually think I told this story on stream too, but I remember going to the library one day, like in the city that I live in, and there was like a mom and her kid, and like the kid was uncontrollable in terms of their excitement. Like they were bouncing up and down, so excited to go to the library. And I was like, man, like I used to feel that way about reading, and I like reading, but like I'm not like barely containing myself bouncing going to the library. You know, when did I lose that? And that kind of got me reflecting. So I worked very, very briefly at a big box bookstore. And one of the things that I learned about that, so, you know, the you think, well, you know, it's a bookstore. You know, what's the best selling part of the bookstore? It's like, well, you know, you could say, well, it's literary type, so maybe it's, you know, like the poetry section or the literature section. It's like not even close. And it's like, okay, well, I think most people understand that there's not a lot of money in poetry, so maybe that was a bad example. But biography, right? You know, people love sports stars, people love actors. Maybe they don't love politicians, but they seem to read books written by politicians. So that's the moneymaker. No. Okay. Magazines, you know, periodicals. Gotta get your Cosmo. Again, no. In fact, I think there's some bookstores I've been to that don't even have a section for that. The moneymaker is the kids section, right? And I have to imagine a large part of that is, you know, parents who very understandably want, you know, to give their kids every opportunity. They want to see things turn out well for them. And what's one of the common things that you hear? Well, reading's good for you. Reading's a skill that you want to instill early on for children. So raise a reader. And so you go in and you spend, and of course, as a business model, they're great because kids' books are really small and you want variety, so you wind up buying lots and lots of them. And they make for great series too, right? Encyclopedia Brown and the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew and Goosebumps, and, you know, there's it's good money to be made in kids' books. But, you know, the thing is that I actually, you know, I understand the pressures that are on parents, but what intrigues me the most, right, is we're thinking about this advantage that we're trying to instill in kids. But the interesting question is, how many of these parents who are trying to give their children, you know, an advantage and a good early head start, how many of them are readers themselves? Like, you know, how much reading are they going to be doing on their own that is not related to the kid? And I mean, again, I don't want to be unfair on some of this stuff because I sort of realize when you have a kid, you have, like, almost everything you do becomes like related to that kid. So like, I don't want to try and suggest that it's like, oh yeah, you know, you'll have your Game of Thrones time, you know, just after your kid's bedtime or something like that. It doesn't work that way. But still, right, I think it's fair to say that for a lot of people, while they were maybe readers as kids, maybe their parents forced them to read, although I can think of worse fates. There's something to... Oh, crap. I'm disappointed in myself. I'll just limit myself to the one, but I feel like I could have done better there. You know, something happens, very often school, I suspect, to change the situation. But I still think that, you know, it's worth kind of examining what, I don't know, for lack of a better term, what went wrong. Like, why do we go from being able to completely understand, you know, I know what that felt like to sort of bounce up and down with excitement at the idea of going to the library, to liking reading, but maybe not that much, you know, not enough to be bouncing up and down on the way. And again, the thing that interests me the most is just this idea that it clearly can't be people thinking that reading ceases to be useful once you become an adult. If anything, it becomes all the more important. But yeah, so it was just kind of interesting to see Delude talk about this, because we put that effort on reading, and yet I think most people would consider movies and games to be very passive forms of entertainment. And so it's interesting when someone's talking about things that they prefer to see movies given as a second because they're too passive, while games are actually held up as something that really sort of forces you to sort of think and interact. Because I do actually think that's the right way to think about these things. But obviously I'm a gamer. I play games, so I'm automatically going to think of them that way. Whereas an outside party is probably going to feel more like, okay, this is for pimply nerds in basements, or
빨리 좀 하면 안 돼?
you know what? I'm gonna, just because you said that, I'm gonna hack another terminal. Okay. I probably should have thought that through, because I don't think I have any other alternatives.
빨리 좀 하면 안 돼?
All right. I'll be allowed to talk to you eventually.
You 황보?
그래. 근데 다들 날 치타라고 불러. 내가 또 치타처럼 존나 빠르거든.
Hurry up, get in a SIG. 2 cars packed of tigers heading straight for the motel.
Nobody calls you that. How'd you get here?
야, 차 타고 왔지. 걸어왔겠냐? 이 근처에 주차해뒀어.
Let me do the driving.
My name is spelled D-Z-E-N-G, for fuck's sake. I'll be honest, I didn't want to write this book, but they paid me, so here it is. Well, actually, it was written by a ghostwriter. Hey, Jake. Just kidding. I haven't lost all my self-respect. Not yet. So who even reads books nowadays? I thought people only bought them to decorate their apartments. At least, that's what I do. By the way, wouldn't it be better to just get rid of shelves altogether? Something to think about. So where was I? All right. So the publisher told me that they want to publish my autobiography, and do I have any questions? Of course, I asked them if I could swear like a drunken sailor, like the drunken sailor I am, and they said, sure, we'll see. Shit, fuck, cunt-looking asshole. Hey, it works. Now that that's over with, let's move on. You might have seen me on TV, where I host a satirical show called Info Flash. It's a pretty sweet gig. Once in a while, I get to read smarmy jokes off a teleprompter written by our interns, and they pay me more than you make in a year. Isn't capitalism fabulous? All right, but how did I get here, you ask? Simple. One of my dad's colleagues was a showrunner at N54 News, and suddenly I found myself going around with a coffee pot. Refills, anyone? It was all unpaid, of course. Apart from that, there wasn't much to do, so you could usually find me out back taking one of my 100 or so daily smoke breaks. For some reason, people thought I was funny. Somehow, the shit that came out of my mouth made grown men cry with laughter, so they plopped me down in front of a camera, and I just kind of winged it from there. How do you get where I am? Well, you can't, because your dad doesn't have a showrunner friend at N54, and it's not like they're going to pluck some rando off the street. Don't you know people like me aren't supposed to rub shoulders with bottom feeders like you? Oh, and did I already mention that capitalism is fabulous?
Do I look blind or deaf to you? Shut your trap. We'll come back to this.
Help, I'm at the motel in St. Martin. Please hurry, the tigers are already here. Okay, FF5555. And we'll see where we are after this. So, can I get a 7A55? No, I don't think I can. Oh, hang on. Where'd he go?
Shut your trap if you don't want to eat lead.
Right, so the hard part on this one is using the car. Oh. That's no good. Okay, so... I don't know if it's designed to be done this way, but it strikes me as probably not a bad idea to use the cameras to tag all the enemies. Although in truth, taking them out is far more reliable than just working around them. I don't know if I'm going to make this in time. I still have the system collapse if it comes to it. I blew it. That was not one of my better moments. Actually, I think we probably got rid of all the tiger claws, so we can just take a straight line to wherever we need to go. That's an interesting detail, actually. I mean, so obviously I've got enough to be able to make it out of here, but looking at that, so the fact that I don't have the force open is kind of neat, because that forces me through this part of the level. Which is, of course, where the guards would normally be.
Looking fine, my brother. Right? Must be that new batch.
으, 씨발. 어우, 존나 아슬아슬했는데 그래도 우리가 해냈어.
We. If it wasn't for me, you'd be a stain on a motel floor.
I will confess, I do enjoy some of the menial jobs in this, like this. Like, obviously, you don't play a Cyberpunk game to babysit an idiot.
넌 별명 같은 거 없어?
Nope.
그럼 이참에 뭐라도 생각해놔. 길거리에서 겁나 잘
And then
Is that so?
당연하지. 그냥 입에 착 붙는 거로.
Okay, we're here. Get out.
야, 잠깐만. 아, 근데 저 새끼를 믿어도 돼? 아, 너 가면 내 콩팥 떼가고 그러는 건 아니지?
Reggie hired and direct. Ran the spec herself.
알았어,
no problem, Jamie.
알았다고.
Thank you very
아,
much.
내리면 되잖아. 그리고 모텔에서 도와줘서 고마웠어.
I'll try and be, one, I'll try and be a little bit more on the ball, but number two, I will try and be more on time for Hellblade when it starts.
Flawless work, V. Huangbo thinks your nickname should be the Furious Lion, so I guess he's happy. Closing the gig, sending you the cred.
But yeah, I do get a little bit of an enjoyment out of playing some of these less glamorous missions. Because there's just something fun about being in a game like Cyberpunk where, you know, the client has money, but is the sort of person you could not stand sitting next to in a bar. And, you know, instead of driving your awesome car, you have to you know, you have to put up with what they own. So, I think, I mean, if there's interest in me going a little bit later, one thing's for sure, V, you're on your way to the top. I'm just glad I can help you along the way. New gigs are waiting. Okay. Wasn't expecting that, but oh, Sandra Dorset. That's the, I believe that's the woman that we helped at in the first mission. Hey, it's Sandra Dorset, the one you saved from the scavengers. After what happened, I get the feeling I can trust you. Would you be up for retrieving a little something for me? I'll pay, of course, but it's kind of a sensitive matter, so I'd rather not get a fixer involved. It's my databank. The scavengers must have taken it while they were keeping me there. It was still connected to the net, so I traced it before they caught on and switched it off. I'm sending you the coordinates. Call me if you find it. I'd be super grateful. P.S. Data's confidential. I trust you won't access it. So I do want to follow up on that one because I think that's an interesting mission, but...
Everything sucks.
Been doing biz here long?
2 years, maybe more. Wasn't easy at first, but I made the right connections. Half the heavy lifting in business is the networking. This and the will to be cooperative and flexible.
What kind of stuff you got?
Okay, so my ideal would be to upgrade basically anything that isn't orange yet. Upgrade that. So it's the proxy shield, the subdermal armor. I think that's it. So we can get started with that. So I suppose the chitin would be the first one for me to level up. Alternatively, I can try and buy more stuff for my character. So we've got the frontal cortex. So what I'm curious about for these would be, so they got the mechatronic core. So apparently I've got 2 of these. The Krenzikov boost system improves Krenzikov by enhancing the user's speed and reflexes when it's active. Well, that's just it. I don't necessarily want to have to activate these things. It's kind of like a passive bonus if I can get it. So the quantum tuner. So I need... All right, so I'm actually hitting the limits of what my character can put in. That is good to know. I'm actually also happy to know, so with the gorilla arms, I was wondering if I'd get a sufficient body boost off of that one, but I don't seem to. Okay, so again, we're hitting the limits of cyberware capacity. Which again, I'm not necessarily opposed to. I'm not opposed to pushing up. But I'd kind of like that to be a conscious decision that I'm making. You know, I'd like to make that decision in relation to like a hard. This is the direction I want to take my character. I'm curious how high I can level this stuff up, though. Okay, 2 pluses. So how do I want to handle this? I think I'll just push the upgrades until I stop seeing icons pointing up. The funny thing here is I haven't really put that much thought towards any kind of a build for the character. I've just kind of been winging it. I don't think that's the end of the world. Like, I think most of these items I bought for some reason at the time, so just, you know, upgrading them isn't... well, sorry, exception would be the ones that are listed as iconic. I think those I tend to just equip because I can. So I'm not too opposed to taking the time to level these things up, but it may be that there's better things for me to equip. I do know, though, that it would not be a bad idea for me to get the Edge Runner perk at some point. So if I'm able to upgrade everything and have sort of money and resources left over, and the cap is on me getting the Edge Runner perk, I may... that may be an indication that I need to start sort of breaking down parts for components and essentially focusing more on improving my character and improving my my gear. So, with that in mind, let's go to the backpack. We'll focus on the weapons first. Again, we're sorting by type so I can find any of the duplicates. I'm not expecting too many extra weapons. But essentially anything I can turn into parts is welcome. So this has more slots. Okay, that's good enough start. Is anything that's not tier 5? To be fair, there's a few of these that I could probably just put into storage at this point too, but...
Oh, you're just gonna... Okay.
Alright, so if I wanted to do one other mission... Well, there is something over... No, I actually should probably turn in... I realize this has been a little... I don't want to say a bust, but I realize that this has been not a lot of progress in the game relative to the amount of time that I've been spending in it. But I did get a late start, and I know a couple of people are heading to sleep, and I was originally going to get some stuff done tonight, but it might just be smarter for me to turn in early. So, I do apologize for not making a little more progress, but I think I'll leave it here. Hopefully we have somebody live that I can host, though. Well, I know this is usually somebody I host on Friday, but this would be, you know, he is available. So I've got Kilgore Trout playing Star Trek Elite Force 2. So I will leave you in his hands. There is a GOG connection here because he is a member of the GOG stream team, and I believe he did actually do Cyberpunk with his... Oh, actually, yeah. So this is going to sound mean, but I remember the last time I hosted with the number that I saw on the host button, that was actually commented on the stream, and that didn't feel great. So if nothing else for me, I'm actually not going to do the host. If you'd like to see him, you can go check out Kilgore Trout, KLG 0RE_TR0UT. But in this case, I think I'm actually going to refrain from hosting in that case. I apologize to those of you who want to just go on a raid, but hey, Revive Snow, thank you very much. Were you? I don't know if you were here the whole time, but I'm just wrapping up. But yeah, I was gonna do the raid, but this is one of the drawbacks. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I wasn't at my best today. I'm not feeling 100%. This is, I don't know. I feel like I don't need to tell Revive Snow this, but I think one of the drawbacks for me is, you know, everybody has their own style, but I think if people comment on a raid not being big enough, it makes me less inclined to do the raid. So I try not to let sort of petty stuff like that keep me from doing raids, but when it's provoked a certain type of reaction, I usually, you know, I take the hint and don't move on that. So, oh, that's really funny. I'm looking forward to hearing more of that story, Revive Snow. I hope I get a chance. For those of, I don't think there's too many people here, but for those of you who've not had the pleasure, I have a lot of fun hanging out with Revive Snow, fellow Canadian. And I've watched a lot of Grand Theft Auto, but is not just a Grand Theft Auto streamer. Does a bit of variety. Has been doing more Apex Legends whenever I've been hanging out lately. But definitely another streamer I like to hang out with. Anyways, have a good night, everybody. Sorry for the bit of a weird stream tonight, but I will try and be on my best behavior for Monday. Until then, take care.